The Senate chamber was packed to the rafters. Cameras flashed, aides whispered, and tension hummed like static in the air. On one side sat Senator John Neely Kennedy, the Louisiana bulldog with that slow southern drawl that could charm a crowd or cut it clean in half. Across from him, Representative Adam Schiff leaned forward, polished and precise, ready to make a show of intellect and moral outrage. The hearing, officially about ethical oversight in government communications, had turned into something far juicier, a political showdown that everyone knew would end up trending before sunset. Schiff adjusted his glasses, his tone sharp as he looked across the table. "Senator Kennedy," he began, "some of your recent comments about federal investigations border on misinformation. Don't you think it's dangerous to undermine public trust in our institutions?" The crowd murmured. Kennedy didn't blink. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands like a man about to tell a story instead of start a fight. His lips curved into that famous half-smile, the one that said "bless your heart" long before his mouth did. "Congressman," Kennedy drawled, his accent thick as warm syrup, "I appreciate your concern, but I reckon if the American people are losing trust in Washington, it's not because I opened my mouth, it's because y'all won't close yours." The audience laughed, the room suddenly alive with murmurs and a few stifled claps. Schiff's jaw tightened, the smile on his face forced. Kennedy wasn't done. He tapped his pen against the table like a drumbeat. "Now, I didn't come here to play word games, son. I came to talk about truth. And if you're fixin' to throw shade at me, you'd best bring something heavier than that feather you call an argument." The laughter exploded. Schiff blinked, trying to recover his footing, but Kennedy's words had landed. The senator sat back, calm as a preacher after Sunday service, while the internet already had its headline. "You don't bring a feather to a gunfight, son." Schiff leaned forward, his voice rising just enough to cut through the laughter still echoing in the room. "Senator, with all due respect, this isn't a comedy hour. We're discussing serious matters of public accountability." His words came crisp, deliberate, the cadence of a man used to control, but Kennedy wasn't one to be boxed in by polished phrasing or political theater. The senator tilted his head, eyes glinting with the mischief of a man who'd seen too many serious men say too many silly things. "Well, Adam," he said slowly, "I reckon accountability's a fine word. Rolls off the tongue real pretty. But words are like biscuits, they don't mean much unless there's something real inside." A ripple of laughter ran through the gallery. Schiff's lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't about biscuits, Senator. It's about integrity, something your recent comments seem to lack." The air went still. Kennedy's smile never faltered, but his eyes sharpened. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low and deliberate. "Now, hold your horses there, son. You can call me a lot of things, but don't you dare question my integrity. I've been in more hearings than you've had hot dinners, and I've seen more spin in this building than a hurricane back home." Schiff tried to speak, but Kennedy didn't give him the room. He raised a hand, his tone smooth but cutting. "See, Congressman, you're mighty good at accusing folks of misdeeds. But every time someone asks you for proof, you start talking like a lawyer with a bad hand of cards, lots of words, not much truth." The audience gasped, cameras zoomed in. Schiff's jaw flexed. Kennedy leaned back, voice soft but lethal. "Where I come from, son, if you don't have facts, you don't flap your gums. 'Cause in Louisiana, talking nonsense at a gunfight only gets you one thing, embarrassed." The crowd erupted. Schiff blinked, his composure cracking as Kennedy's one-liners ricocheted across social media. The hearing was no longer about ethics, it was about who'd survive the next round. The laughter had barely faded when Schiff snapped back into focus, his tone clipped and cold. "Senator Kennedy," he said, straightening his tie, "if you spent half as much time reading reports as you do rehearsing punchlines, maybe this committee would actually make progress." The jab landed awkwardly, met with scattered murmurs but no laughter. Kennedy raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching like he was fighting the urge to grin. He spoke slowly, every word soaked in that deliberate southern rhythm that made even an insult sound like a blessing. "Well now, Adam," he said, "I've read plenty of reports. most of them written by folks who couldn't tell common sense from a crawfish in a hurricane. And I'll tell you something else, progress don't come from talking folks to sleep. It comes from doing the job you swore to do. Schiff bristled. And what job is that, Senator? Undermining the credibility of federal institutions for applause lines? Kennedy chuckled softly, shaking his head. No, son. My job's remindin' folks like you that truth don't wear party colors. You can wrap yourself in a flag of righteousness all you want, but if you're peddlin' half-truths, that dog still won't hunt. The phrase hit like a gavel. Schiff's face reddened as a few reporters in the back stifled chuckles. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, the kind that forced the whole room to lean in. You see, Adam, I grew up around folks who knew when a man was trying to sell them a story instead of the truth. And right now, you're sellin' snake oil with a smile. The air snapped with tension. Schiff opened his mouth to respond, but Kennedy was already sitting back, hands folded, that half-grin returning like he'd just called checkmate. Online, the clips were already spreading. Snake oil versus Southern Steel, one headline read. And under it, a quote that would define the moment. You don't bring a feather to a gunfight, son.by now. The hearing had shifted from procedural dullness to pure theater. Every reporter in Washington was tuned in. The air buzzed with tension and caffeine, every camera lens locked on the verbal duel unfolding in real time. Schiff leaned forward, his voice sharper now, a hint of anger threading through the polished tone he was known for. Senator, he said, your charm might play well on late-night television, but this is Congress. Facts matter here. Kennedy's eyebrows lifted just a fraction, his smirk forming slow as a sunrise. Facts, he repeated, his drawl stretching the word like molasses. Well, bless your heart, Adam, you're right, facts do matter. But so does honesty, and last I checked, you can't pick and choose between the two like items on a brunch menu. A low ripple of laughter moved through the room. Schiff's nostrils flared, but Kennedy wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice tightening, not loud, but with the kind of authority that carried more weight than volume. You talk about facts, son. But when those facts don't fit your story, you twist them harder than a pretzel at a state fair. You ever try tellin' the truth without a filter? Might surprise you how clean it feels. Schiff shot back, you think this is funny? You're turning serious oversight into a circus act. Kennedy tilted his head, deadpan. Well, Adam, if it's a circus, it's only 'cause you keep showing up with the clown shoes. The audience burst out laughing, even a few senators tried to hide their grins behind folders. Schiff's composure cracked, his face flushing with anger. Kennedy didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. His calm confidence filled the room like thunder rolling across an open field. Son, he said, almost kindly, you keep mistakin' noise for strength. Down in Louisiana, we got a sayin' for that. A rooster can crow all day, but it still ain't the one layin' the eggs. The room erupted. Schiff's hand clenched on the table, his polished facade finally slipping. Kennedy leaned back, eyes steady, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. The headlines were already writing themselves. Kennedy turned Schiff's hearing into a Southern roast. The gavel slammed once, twice, trying to restore order to a room that was now more comedy club than committee chamber. Reporters whispered furiously, their thumbs flying across phones, feeding headlines to the internet that was already ablaze. Schiff's face was set in a tight mask of irritation, but his voice came out steady, too steady. Senator, he said, his tone dripping with restraint, if you're done entertaining your audience, perhaps we can return to substance. You've made a career out of one-liners. Do you ever plan to deal in policy? Kennedy's gaze lifted slowly, a faint chuckle escaping his lips. Oh, I deal in policy, Adam. But where I'm from, we also deal in truth, and we prefer it straight, not shaken, stirred, and dressed up for a headline. A few senators smirked, others pretended to study their notes. Schiff pressed on, leaning into the microphone. You think charm and folksy sayings can replace facts. But the people deserve better than wordplay. Kennedy tapped his pen once, the sound echoing in the chamber. Then he leaned in, his voice lowering to a steady rumble. You're right, they do deserve better. They deserve leaders who don't get on camera and act like saints while sending emails that read like bad crime novels. Gasps rippled across the room. Schiff froze. He knew exactly what Kennedy was referring to, that leaked message floating through the press, the one suggesting narrative management after a misstep. Kennedy didn't flinch. See, Adam, he continued, you can polish your words all you want, but truth's got a way of scratchin' through the shine. And when it does, it don't care how expensive your suit is. Schiff's voice wavered. That's a gross mischaracterization. Kennedy cut him off gently, his tone calm but lethal. No, son. That's just callin' a spade a spade. You can't win a gunfight with feathers and fancy words. And right now, you're out of bullets. The audience went dead silent for half a second, then the laughter hit like thunder. Schiff's glare could have cut glass, but Kennedy just sat back, arms crossed, the picture of unbothered Southern confidence. By the time the gavel banged again, the clip was already trending under one title. Kennedy to Schiff, out of bullets, son. By the 6th hour, the hearing no longer felt like Washington, it felt like a prizefight. Cameras zoomed in on every twitch, every glance, every micro-smile that crossed Kennedy's face as Schiff tried, and failed, to steer the discussion back to substance. Sweat beaded on Schiff's temple under the blinding lights, while Kennedy sat easy, relaxed, his posture casual but his tone razor-sharp. Let's get one thing straight, Schiff snapped finally, his patience thinning. This isn't a stage for your rehearsed Southern charm, Senator. The American people deserve leaders who rely on data, not down-home metaphors. Kennedy tilted his head, his grin slow, almost pitying. Well, Adam, data's a fine thing, when it ain't cherry-picked, twisted, and served up like bad gumbo. But bless your heart, son, you wouldn't know truth if it bit you on the ankle. Laughter rippled through the chamber again. Schiff slammed his folder shut. Do you take anything seriously? He demanded. Kennedy's eyes locked on him, his tone dropping low, dangerous. I take everything seriously, son. That's why I don't let folks in $1,000 suits rewrite reality just to look good on TV. You talk about integrity, but all I see is someone trying to sell it wholesale. The words landed heavy. Schiff's face flushed, his composure cracking for the first time. You think this is leadership? Mocking your colleagues? Turning oversight into insult? Kennedy leaned forward, elbows on the table. No, son. Leadership's saying what everyone else is too scared to. And if that bruises your ego, well, he paused, smiling just enough to twist the knife, maybe next time, you'll bring something sharper than feathers to a gunfight. The gallery gasped. Even the committee chair looked stunned, her gavel frozen mid-air. Schiff stared at Kennedy, searching for a comeback, but there wasn't one left in the chamber. Kennedy just adjusted his tie and sat back, the faintest smirk crossing his face. The internet exploded within minutes. Kennedy versus Schiff, the roast heard round the hill. Hashtags like #feathers at a gunfight and #bless your heart Adam started trending before the hearing even adjourned. Kennedy didn't just win the exchange, he owned the room. The next morning, Washington woke up to chaos. News networks replayed the clip of Kennedy's final line on a loop, his calm drawl, his smirk, the devastating precision of, maybe next time, you'll bring something sharper than feathers to a gunfight. It was everywhere. Cable anchors were quoting it like scripture. Memes, edits, remixes, the internet had turned Kennedy's Southern roast into legend overnight. Schiff's office, meanwhile, was in meltdown mode. His staffers huddled around laptops, their faces pale. The headlines were merciless. Kennedy outguns Schiff in fiery Senate showdown. Schiff brings feathers, Kennedy brings fire. Every outlet had picked a side, and Schiff was losing in the court of public opinion. Inside his Capitol Hill office, Schiff paced, jaw tight, trying to figure out how it had slipped so fast. His aide murmured, "Sir, maybe we issue a statement clarifying." Clarifying what? Schiff snapped. That a senator mocked federal oversight on live TV? But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't what people had seen. They hadn't seen a mockery of oversight, they'd seen confidence, control, and Kennedy's unmistakable command of the room. Meanwhile, in Baton Rouge, Kennedy's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Every conservative outlet wanted an interview. Fox, Newsmax, even local Louisiana radio hosts were calling his staff non-stop. Kennedy finally stepped into his office, coffee in hand, grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Morning, y'all," he drawled to his team. "I see we made some noise." His communications director laughed. "Senator, the internet's calling it the political knockout of the year. Schiff's camp is scrambling. They're saying you twisted his words." Kennedy took a slow sip of his coffee. "Son," he said, eyes twinkling, "if they're hollerin', it means they heard the truth." He leaned back in his chair. "We ain't in the business of twistin' words. We just tell it plain, and Washington ain't used to plain talk. That's why it stings." As the clip continued to circulate, Kennedy's quote took on a life of its own, printed on mugs, t-shirts, and memes across social media. His approval numbers ticked up overnight. Schiff's fell. The hearing had ended, but the story was just beginning, and Kennedy, as always, was one step ahead of the storm. By midday, Washington's political machine was in full spin mode. Every news network had its own version of what happened. Conservatives called it a masterclass in truth-telling, while progressives tried to paint it as grandstanding from the senator of sound bites. But none of it changed the viral momentum. The clip of Kennedy roasting Schiff had cracked 10 million views before lunch. Schiff appeared on Morning Focus, his expression tight, smile forced. "This isn't about theatrics," he told the host. "This is about protecting facts and ensuring the American people get the truth, not a performance." But the host pressed him. "Senator Kennedy says you've been playing politics with half-truths. Do you have proof to the contrary?" For a moment, Schiff hesitated. It was only a second, but it was enough. Social media pounced. The still frame of that pause flooded Twitter with captions like, "That's the look of a man who brought feathers to a gunfight." Meanwhile, Kennedy wasn't doing interviews. He didn't need to. His words were doing the work for him. His staff watched the coverage from his Louisiana office as Kennedy leaned against the doorframe, reading the morning paper. "Bless his heart," he murmured, shaking his head at a headline. Schiff tries to recover after Kennedy's verbal takedown. "Senator," his press secretary said, "we're getting requests from every major outlet. Do you want to issue a statement?" Kennedy lowered the paper, his grin slow and deliberate. "Statement's already out there, son. It's 5 words long, you don't bring a feather." The room laughed. Kennedy set the paper down and added, "Let him talk. The louder he yells, the clearer folks hear the truth." Later that evening, Schiff's team tried damage control with a social post about respectful discourse. It backfired instantly. Replies flooded in. "Respect starts with honesty, Congressman." Kennedy didn't yell, he just aimed straight. Even mainstream journalists started to admit it. Kennedy's blend of humor, confidence, and plain-spoken grit had cut through Washington's noise. Schiff had come armed with facts and fury, but Kennedy had something stronger, authenticity. And in politics, authenticity was the one weapon no consultant could be. By the end of the week, the Kennedy-Schiff showdown had turned from a single exchange into a full-blown political moment. Late-night hosts replayed the clip, comedians reenacted it, and conservative pundits couldn't stop quoting that one-liner that burned itself into the national memory: "You don't bring a feather to a gunfight, son." Inside the Capitol, even staffers from opposing sides were whispering about it in hallways. Some tried to play it down, but everyone knew the truth: Kennedy hadn't just won a debate, he'd defined one. Schiff's confidence, once rock-solid, had cracked under the weight of Kennedy's country-fed logic and brutal simplicity. During a quiet lunch at a D.C. diner, Kennedy sat with two aides, stirring his coffee. He didn't gloat. Didn't have to. "You see, boys," he said softly, "it ain't about bein' loud or fancy. It's about bein' right, and sayin' it in a way folks remember." His aide grinned. "Well, sir, they'll remember this one for a long time." Across town, Schiff sat in his office, watching the replay again on mute. He hated the way Kennedy's calmness came across: not smug, not cruel, just confident. Schiff's communications chief tried to spin it. "We can pivot, sir. Talk policy, push a counter-statement, maybe do a live Q&A to show transparency." But Schiff didn't answer. The damage wasn't in the facts, it was in perception. Kennedy had turned his rhetoric into rhythm, his southern cadence into ammunition. Schiff's rebuttals, full of precision and polish, sounded like noise by comparison. Meanwhile, Kennedy's approval back home in Louisiana surged. Local radio callers called him the senator who speaks like one of us. The viral clip had humanized him: funny, sharp, fearless. That night, Kennedy appeared briefly on a local Baton Rouge broadcast. The host asked, "Senator, do you think things got too heated?" Kennedy smiled, leaning into the camera. "Well, ma'am," he said, "I just call it like I see it. You start slinging mud, don't be surprised when it splashes back. That's not heat, that's consequence." The line hit just as hard as the first one. Twitter lit up again. #consequences not complaints began trending right under #Feathergate. Schiff was still fighting for control of the story. Kennedy had already become the story. By the following Monday, Washington had moved on, at least officially. New hearings, new scandals, the same endless cycle. But one thing stuck like a tune no one could stop humming: Senator John Neely Kennedy's line. "You don't bring a feather to a gunfight, son." It had transcended politics, becoming part of the American vernacular overnight, quoted by journalists, comedians, even football coaches looking to fire up their teams. In Louisiana, Kennedy's office buzzed with calls from supporters. Reporters wanted interviews, networks wanted exclusives. His communications team urged him to capitalize on the moment, maybe release a statement or a short video. But Kennedy waved them off. "If you gotta explain a punchline," he said with a grin, "it probably didn't land right the first time." That evening, he sat alone in his office, the glow of the city lights bouncing off the window. The video replayed softly on a muted TV, Schiff red-faced, Kennedy calm, the audience caught between laughter and disbelief. It wasn't just a victory. It was a statement: that truth, delivered plain and steady, still had power in a city built on spin. He picked up the phone and called his chief of staff. "Tell the team to keep moving," he said. "We ain't here to gloat, we're here to work. Let the pundits talk, I've said my piece." Across the country, the moment was still alive. College debate teams dissected it. Podcasts analyzed it. Even Schiff's allies quietly admitted that Kennedy had handled the exchange like a seasoned prizefighter: no shouting, no panic, just precision and timing. Weeks later, at a town hall in Lafayette, a young voter stood up and asked, "Senator, do you really think politics can change with just words?" Kennedy smiled, his eyes warm but sharp. "Son," he said, "words built this country. But they only matter if you mean them. You can't fake honesty, not for long. Folks always know when you're tellin' the truth, and when you're just feather-wavin'. The room erupted in laughter and applause. Kennedy tipped his head, that same calm, confident grin spreading across his face. And just like that, the senator from Louisiana reminded the world, in a city full of noise, that sometimes, the quietest voice with the sharpest truth wins the fight. You know, folks keep askin' me why I talk the way I do. Why I use plain words when everybody else in this town is busy usin' $10 ones. The answer's simple: I ain't here to sound smart. I'm here to speak truth. And sometimes truth don't come wrapped in polish, it comes with grit, with dirt under its nails, and a little fire in its belly. He pauses, resting his hand on the table, eyes sharp. Now, I don't hate nobody. Not Congressman Schiff, not the folks who disagree with me. But I do hate dishonesty. I hate seein' good people get fed lies like their breakfast biscuits. So if tellin' it straight sounds rough, well, that's just how it comes out where I'm from. Kennedy leans closer, his voice dropping into that unmistakable Southern steel. You can dress up a lie, son. You can shine it, spin it, sell it, but at the end of the day, it's still a lie. And if you bring that to me, don't expect me to whisper. 'Cause in my book, if you come to a gunfight with feathers, you best be ready to lose. He smiles, the kind of smile that says the fight's over, and he's already won. Truth don't need an army, just a voice. And as long as I've got one, I'll keep usin' it, loud enough for the folks back home to hear. He puts his jacket back on, gives a final nod to the camera, and walks out. The screen fades to black with his line echoing softly. You don't bring a feather to a gunfight, son.